Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine for no reason? That unsettling feeling that you're being watched, even when you're completely alone? What if I told you that feeling might be more than just your imagination? Tonight's story comes from a viewer, a man named Leo, who learned that some old houses don't just hold memories, they hold something else entirely. Leo and his wife Clara had just bought their dream home. It was an old Victorian, a bit of a fixer-upper, nestled on the edge of a quiet, forgotten town. They were so excited, picturing their future kids running through the spacious halls. The first few weeks were blissful, filled with the sounds of hammers, laughter, and the smell of fresh paint. But as the newness wore off, a subtle wrongness began to creep in. It started small. A door left open would be found shut. Keys left on the kitchen counter would turn up on the mantelpiece. They laughed it off at first, blaming it on house settling or their own forgetfulness. But then came the whispers. Faint, like the rustling of leaves, they would drift from empty rooms, always stopping the moment you tried to listen closely. One evening, Leo was in the basement organizing old boxes. The air down there was always heavy and cold, but that night, it was different. It felt charged, electric. He was sorting through some old photographs when he heard a distinct sound from the far corner of the room. A soft, rhythmic thud. Thud, 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 like a small ball being bounced against the damp stone wall. He called out, "Clara, is that you?" The only reply was silence, and the thudding stopped. His heart pounded in his chest. He slowly walked over, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There was nothing there. No ball, no person, just a damp patch on the wall. Shaking his head, he tried to convince himself he was just tired. Upstairs, Clara was having her own experiences. She'd often catch a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye, a fleeting shadow that would vanish when she turned to look. She started hearing footsteps on the second floor when Leo was right beside her in the living room. They were light, quick steps, like those of a child running down the hallway. They tried to be rational, checking for drafts, loose floorboards, even rodents. But nothing explained the increasingly personal nature of the events. The turning point came on a stormy Tuesday night. Rain lashed against the windows, and the wind howled like a grieving animal. Leo was working late in his home office when the power flickered and died, plunging the house into absolute darkness. He fumbled for his phone, its flashlight beam a weak comfort. As he stood up, he heard it again, closer this time. The sound of a child's giggle, echoing from the top of the stairs. It wasn't a happy sound. It was hollow, filled with a strange, chilling mirth. "Clara," he called out, his voice trembling. "This isn't funny." No answer. He started to move towards the hallway, his phone held out like a weapon. The giggle came again, this time right at his ear, a cold puff of air against his neck. He spun around, a scream catching in his throat. The hallway was empty. He ran to the living room, where he found Clara huddled by the fireplace, her face pale. She had heard it too. They spent the rest of the night huddled together, listening to the disembodied footsteps and faint whispers that seemed to dance just outside their door. The next morning, sleep-deprived and terrified, they decided to do some research. At the local town library, an old dusty archive held the town's history, and there they found it. A newspaper article from 1923, detailing a tragedy that had occurred in their very house. The house had belonged to the Blackwood family. They had a young daughter, a girl named Lily. One winter, a terrible sickness swept through the town, and Lily fell gravely ill. Her parents, desperate, locked her in her upstairs bedroom, believing it would contain the illness. According to the article, the little girl spent her final days alone, her only toy a small rubber ball she would bounce against the wall. She died in that room, alone and afraid. The article ended with a chilling note. Neighbors claimed that for years after, they could still hear the faint sound of a bouncing ball and a child's sorrowful cries coming from the empty house. Everything clicked into place. The light footsteps, the whispers, the bouncing ball in the basement. It was Lily. She wasn't malevolent. She was lonely, a lost little girl, trapped in the place where she had suffered most. Leo and Clara were living in her space. That night, armed with this knowledge, they did something unconventional. Instead of fear, they tried to show compassion. They went to the top of the stairs, their voices soft. "Lily," Clara said, her voice shaking slightly. "We're not here to hurt you. We know you're here. You don't have to be alone anymore." For a moment there was only the sound of the old house creaking. Then, from the end of the hall, came a single soft thud. The sound of the ball, bouncing just once. It wasn't menacing. It felt like an answer. From that day on, things changed. The activity didn't stop completely, but it was different. A door might still close on its own, but it felt less like a trick and more like a gentle reminder. Sometimes they would still hear the faint footsteps, but they no longer sounded frantic, more like a peaceful wandering. They were no longer intruders in a haunted house. They were sharing their home. They had a roommate, a quiet, spectral little girl named Lily. Leo told me they still live in that house. They've grown accustomed to their unseen guest. They sometimes leave a small toy in the upstairs hallway or say goodnight to the empty room at the end of the hall. He says that sometimes, on a quiet night, if you listen very, very closely, you can still hear the faint rhythmic bounce of a ball, a lonely echo from a long-forgotten past. It serves as a constant reminder that we are never truly alone and that some stories don't end with death. They just wait for someone new to listen. What do you think? Could you live in a house with a history like that? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thank you for joining me for this story. If you enjoyed it and want to hear more tales from the shadows, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Stay safe and always check the corners of the room. I'll see you in the next one.